Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. While we are waiting for some participants to come in, let me quickly share some housekeeping rules with you today. Please keep your microphone muted during the session. We will be recording the session, and all the links will be shared with you by next week. And please also make sure that if you have questions during the webinar, please post them in the chat box below. We will allow some time to be answering some of your questions. We are going to give it a couple of more minutes before we officially start. All right, I see we have most of the participants in the room, so it's time to start. Welcome everyone to today's Farmer Income Data Toolkit session, developed and hosted by Fairfood and Akvo. Today we will have a very practical technical session. It's aimed at data analysts and sustainability teams within commodity supply chains. And we'll start today by situating the toolkit that we will discuss into the broader living income commodity strategy that us two organizations have developed together. In the middle section of the webinar, we will walk you through the toolkit. My colleague Sandra will be demoing what we have developed together, and we will help you navigate it, inspire ways to apply, adapt, refine it into your own context. And we will end the session with some new resources that are available and also some ways to integrate the lessons that you've learned into your work. For those who only just stepped in, just really shortly, the housekeeping session will be recorded. All the resources will be shared with you by next week by email. And if you have questions, please use the chat box below. After each section of the toolkit demo, we will pick out a few questions and answer them. And we will also save some time at the end for a Q&A. So before we dive into the material, let me first properly introduce the two hosts of today. My name is Lotje Kaak. I work as a living income project manager at Fairfood. We are a nonprofit with 25 plus years of experience in building future-proof.
Let's confirm that the deck is not being seen.
Sorry, I'm understanding that we might have some issues. Can you confirm whether you can see your screen or presentation? I see some thumbs up, so everything should be fine. Sorry about that. Let me continue. So my name is Lotje Kaak. I work as a living income project manager at Fairfood. We are a nonprofit with 25 years experience in building future-proof supply chains, financially benefiting smallholder farmers. Living income is at the core of our work, and we run several projects aiming at designing, implementing living income interventions within supply chains. And with me today, my co-host is Sandra Fudorova. She's a data expert at Akvo Foundation. Akvo empowers citizens and governments to become data-driven so that they can solve complex problems in water, agriculture, and climate. And within this context of us collaborating, Sandra is responsible for structuring data collection, cleaning, and interpretation. The toolkit that we will discuss today is a core component of the broader living income commodity strategy that we have jointly designed also with Heifer International back in 2024. With the growing pressure to move beyond the ambition to demonstrate real impact and new regulations coming up, we saw the need for a data-driven approach that equips supply chain actors to design, implement effective supply chain specific pricing and living income interventions by using primary yield and cost data across the supply chain. Important to know that it's not about creating sector-wide proxies or benchmark, but it's really about adding an income layer to sustainability monitoring. And we have been developing and refining this strategy for the past few years, thanks to the Reclaim Sustainability Program, which is funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And after having developed it in Honduras, we were able to test it both in the Ugandan and the Sierra Leonean context. And it's also informing several projects beyond this program for different commodities and in different regions. What it's about and what it's not about. So it's really not about, as mentioned, creating a benchmark or a new standard, nor does it serve as a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a supply chain process to collect and validate primary farmer level cost and yield data, to calculate living income aligned farm gate prices for a specific supply chain, to understand cost yield efficiency profiles across farmer segments, and to co-design interventions and pricing pathways that are grounded in evidence. So we believe that practical tools for a more fair value distribution should be accessible to all. And also by developing this toolkit, we make this step towards more transparent and data-driven fair decision-making across value chain. And just to show you what the toolkit is about, it's really your starting point for putting the living income strategy into practice by measuring farmer income and identifying minimum income required for a viable, resilient livelihood. It provides a step-by-step approach to gathering, analyzing robust data, so you can really move from insight to action with clarity and intention. So I think it's time for me to hand it over to my colleague Sandra now. She will take you through the methodology and the toolkits. So over to you, Sandra.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to see such a large attendance, and welcome from me as well. I will, as Lotte has mentioned, walk you through the toolkit and some of the more practical parts, also some of the tools that you can also be using in your own projects to implement this data from beginning to end. And what really is at the core of this toolkit is the farmer living income price, which is the minimum viable price a farmer needs to be paid per kilogram of whatever they are producing in order to be able to reach a living income for the entire household. So how we calculate this is essentially by combining all the costs that a farmer needs to cover in a given year. So that would be your living income benchmark, your production cost, and your farm depreciation cost. And we divide that by everything that a farmer manages to produce in a given year. So that's your yield and production farm size times production farm size. And from that, we derive the price per kilogram that is necessary. And this living income price really comes through the toolkit in multiple aspects, whether it being used as a metric for us to evaluate different interventions and how much these impact farmers, or as a way to segment farmers into different categories that then helps us look at different patterns that we can see within the data. But I understand that most of you are here today to understand how we get to this living income price. And this process of any project will usually follow these 3 steps that you can now see on the screen. So the first, we will go through all of them. I will show you the different parts of the toolkit, all the tools that are there for your use. And then after each phase, we will open the floor for a few questions about that given phase, and there will also be a Q&A at the end. So save your questions for the moment, and we will be more than happy to answer them. But the first part of the process that needs to occur is your scoping and preparation, which is really the part that determines almost the success of the entire project, as it is the place for you to decide alongside your other stakeholders what it really is that you want to be collecting data on. So in this stage, it's important that everyone gets to meet, all the relevant stakeholders are engaged. If this is a project that you're doing for someone else, you might strongly consider getting some local expertise on board and making sure that you are getting all the insights necessary into any kind of crop country combination that you will be working with, as this really determines all the further steps in your projects. One of the first tools that I will be showing you that comes as a part of this would be your, one moment. Oh, whoa. Okay. Yes, there we go. Is your survey builder. So this is the first and most important part of any data collection, having a good survey that is ready to go and that will get you the data that you need. This tool, as you can see, it might feel a bit familiar to some of you. It also builds on our previous work with IDH and then income guidance measurement tool. So it has a bit of a familiar format. And it essentially contains all the necessary questions that you need to be able to derive the household income, as well as information surrounding production costs, yields, and other sources of income, such as income from livestock, income from other crops, or income from off-farm sources. As you might understand, that these questions are standardized. However, for you to be able to apply them to different contexts, they understandably need a little bit of work, which is exactly the first very handy part that the toolkit offers through this contextualization sheet. The contextualization sheet includes two parts. So it is one part that is directly used to help you change the survey and the wording of the questions, as well as the answers to the multiple choice questions. And then there is a second part that I will get to a little bit later that is meant to help you and assist you further during your data cleaning and data analysis. How the contextualization sheet works is that there are essentially two types of fields that you can fill in. One of them would be some, as you can see in the first part, so on administrative terminology of the country. On the right, you can see the example in the case of Honduras. And this automatically changes the wording of the questions to be contextualized to the local setting. Another part that is very important in the contextualization sheet is this part when we arrive at the different inputs and different equipments that you might want to include in your survey. So what you want to do is change every column to true when the specific item that is connected next to it is applicable to your setting. To give you a very concrete example, let's say you are trying to collect data on maize. For example, farmers will not be using drying beds or guardiolas, so you want to keep that as false. However, they may be using agricultural machinery, so you want to turn that to true, so this is then included automatically in the survey. Using this contextualization sheet from start to finish, you will reach a survey, which you can see on the sheet number 2, that now has all the questions targeted directly to your local context and is ready to be uploaded into Kobo Toolbox directly. So then you are ready to get collecting your data. So that is one of the tools that the toolkit is offering. And the second part of the contextualization sheet that comes very handy is your parameter value sheets. So this is where you really gather all the information that is already available in secondary sources to help you during data cleaning on items such as expected price or expected yields or average land size, to really help you zone in on what that sample is that you want to be collecting information on, and to also guide you during your data quality monitoring or data cleaning later on, so that you have certain values that provide a framework within which you want to be collecting data. Second thing that is really important to take care of during this scoping and preparation process is understandably your field preparations and selecting the correct enumerators and making sure that everyone is ready for data collection, including the enumerator training. So the toolkit offers you quite a large support when it comes to enumerator training and also field data collection that we will get to a little bit later. But what you can already be using is that we have included an example of what terms of reference with an enumerator may look like, to also help you make sure that you are getting the best people and that the roles are really clear to everyone involved from the beginning. So these are the two tools that we can see already that come in at the scoping and preparation part of the process. The toolkit obviously details how to use these further and also gives you more practical tips. But this would be the space if anyone has any questions directly about this part of the toolkit. So also this part of the process to come in while we prepare for the other part. Yeah. All right, I see that no questions are coming in, so we can also move on to the second part of this process, which is the part of the actual data collection. So the key of the data collection is having good enumerators who know what they are doing and who understand how to go through the data collection and understand the survey. One way to go through this is by using the toolkit and really going deeper into the tips and tricks it provides. These are very practical tips, whether it comes from obtaining consent and what it really means to have informed consent, all the way down to what enumerators should look like when they are entering the field, making sure they dress professionally, that they maintain a confident and a positive approach, that they are emphasizing anonymity when needed. All of these things are detailed out for you to already be able to have a checklist of what needs to be communicated to the enumerators once they are entering the field. Another thing that we like to use is an enumerator field guide, which includes an example of a consent form that you can be using to insert into the Kobo Toolbox survey, but also certain definitions of what is expected. So one thing that we very commonly experience during data collection and also enumerator training is that there are certain terminologies in the survey which can either be explained differently by different enumerators or generally cause trouble on the ground. And having a field guide such as this that highlights what measurement units you are expecting to be seeing, what is the price that is currently being seen on the market, really helps enumerators to also ground themselves in the local realities when they are collecting data. And it's really important to stress also that these sheets are supposed to be used as supplementary materials, that they are not meant to be used to tell farmers what the answers should be. They are just there to help enumerators probe as efficiently as they can once they are already in the field. So this is an example of another material that you have a template for and that you can further tailor to fit your context and to be the most helpful to you. Another part that is really important during data collection is your data quality monitoring. So on a daily basis, you will see a specific number of entries come back into whatever platform you're collecting through, for example, Kobo Toolbox. And what we see is that your best chance at getting clean and good data is correcting the data as closely to when it was collected. And that might mean calling the farmers back up through the phone contact that they left and checking in about certain values that might seem off or incorrect. Or it might also mean communicating with your enumerators. What we like to do is have a dashboard running that gets re-uploaded on a daily basis, where we really check the key variables that are crucial to us being able to obtain income measurements, such as, for example, prices or yields, land sizes, production costs, labor costs, etc. And we flag every entry that seems to be off, that is unusual, that is not fitting the pattern of the rest of the data, etc., for further review. And this then gets passed on to the data collection supervisor, who is able to collect these entries on a daily basis with enumerators or with farmers. So that is a very important part of the entire data collection, and making sure that you are really retaining as many of the entries as you can, and you are not losing a large chunk of that later on during cleaning when it becomes way too difficult to go back in time and correct. Are there any concrete questions at this moment about data collection and such? I can imagine that this is a large topic, so there perhaps are some questions on how to best plan, how to best prepare. This is the time to come in if that is so.
So meanwhile, there was one question in the chat which has already been answered, but maybe it's good to show. So there was a question on whether we provide recommendations on the sampling approach for such survey.
Yes.
So maybe you can share a little bit on this.
Yes, perfect. One of the tools that we have linked for you to be able to get to a good sample size is your sample size calculator. So what becomes really important with your sampling is the more information that you have going in, the better your sample can be. How we usually operate is by using farmer lists, from different sources, whether that would be through cooperatives, through our partners, or even through the governments, if that is available. And then you have different options depending on what your study is really trying to target. Understandably, if you're looking to get greater insights into how female farmers are performing in smallholder contexts, then you might really consider having equal sizes for men and women to be able to properly compare these segments. If your goal is to get a great idea of what a region is looking like, then trying to follow the proportions that you see within the region in regards to gender and land size and even volumes of production, if that is available, is your go-to. And how you can determine what is a correct sample size is by using a calculator such as this, where you can determine your margin of error and your confidence interval, which are usually the standard is 95% confidence level with 5% margin error, but you can also choose different options based on also the statistical rigor that you want to be putting into your study and your resources and your availability. You insert your total population size. So if you are, for example, trying to get an overview of what the cocoa farmers in Sierra Leone are doing, like your total sample size would be the number of all cocoa farmers within Sierra Leone. And then you receive a sample size that is telling you that at this rate, you are going to get, with 95% certainty, 5% away from reality. So, and we hope that the statistic does the rest. A good rule of thumb is also with your sample size is to up it up by 10%. So if your sample comes up to 377, it's good to aim around the 400, 410 mark, to also account for the fact that some farmers may not be willing to respond to your survey. Some farmers may not be willing to participate. From some farmers, you may not get correct information, so the entries are at the end of the chain unusable. So it is good to plan for some of these eventualities and include a buffer in your sample size so that you are really ready for data collection. I hope that answers your question. And the last item that I will maybe say on that is that it's also always good to have alternatives prepared. And once you're doing the data quality monitoring, you can already see how you are doing in terms of your sample size. So also prepare for the possibility that you may need more farmers. So have an additional list of farmers ready that are outside of your sample that can be easily, the names of which can easily be provided to your data collection supervisor, who can then find them on the ground. What we also find is really helpful on the ground in the actual scenario when you're actually collecting data is having someone who will introduce you to the farmers. So we notice over time that in certain contexts, smallholder farmers are very hesitant to provide information. We're also collecting quite sensitive information. We are asking essentially what they earn in a year. So it's understandable that there is some hesitation around that. So it always helps to have a local person, such as a guide farmer, someone from the community, an extension officer, someone who provides trainings, who is already familiar with the farmers and can provide this first link of introduction. So then when you're coming to collect the data, you already have a certain level of trustworthiness from the eyes of the farmer. That would be on that. I don't know whether more questions came in the chat. Yes.
Yeah, so another set of questions came in, and I think we can give them a couple of minutes before moving on to the next session. So questions by Nico. Should the sample be stratified by income levels, geographic zones, or production systems? Maybe you can answer first, and then I can come back to the other questions.
Yeah, it really depends on what you are trying to have a look at. From our experience, this question is my dream. I would love to be able to stratify on more factors. What we really do see on the ground is that the farmer populations, especially smallholder farmer populations in a lot of the contexts that we work in, are not very well documented. Having a complete farmer list is currently a luxury in most contexts that we operate in. So very often we are lucky to receive information on gender. So often we don't have this information going in to the sampling. So we try to sample as much on based on secondary sources, based on government official information, based on statistics offices that provides some of these points. But I would stratify based on what is the most important for your analysis. So everything that is happening during this whole process, and that is really the key takeaway of this session, is that these steps are so interconnected that you need to do a very good job in your inception and kickoff to understand what the information that you're trying to get out of this is, so that every step after that can work towards that goal. If your hope at the end is to really be able to look at different economic levels of farmers and have sufficiently large sample sizes to be able to compare them and look for patterns, then yes, you should be stratifying on income levels. If your hopes are to differentiate between farmers who are already more further into their sustainability journey and investing further and having more resource intensive agriculture versus farmers who are really more on the line of subsistence farming and low inputs, low fertilizer use, etc., then yes, you want to be stratifying based on production systems. So it is really always about what you are trying to get to, what influences the sample that you will be making. And a good idea when you're thinking about what you're trying to get to is also thinking about what you really have control over. So the hope of this entire toolkit is to give you the data and to give you the tools to be able to make interventions which at the end of the day make a difference. So when you're thinking about what it is that you want to achieve with your data collection, it should be something that may be actionable, that is applicable in the context that you operate in. Is your client really focused on agroforestry? Then you might be wanting to collect more data on agroforestry. Is your client looking into replacing chemical fertilizer with organic fertilizer? That is where your data focus should be. So these things are all interlinked and therefore also with the sampling. Are there any other questions?
Yes, a couple of more questions came in, so I'm pretty sure we won't be able to answer them all already. So we will cover the answers also in the blog after the session, but maybe I can pick up one more question before moving to the next part. So a question from Olga: in your current experience, how long do the surveys with each farmer take, for instance, in Honduras or Uganda? And considering the sensitive nature of the topic itself, being incomes, would it not be more appropriate to ask proxy questions?
Yes. So when it comes to the length of this survey, we are averaging anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half, dependent on how the survey goes. Also, because the survey itself can have a very different number of questions based on the crop. So some crops exist in cycles of 2 harvests per year. You can think coffee. And some crops exist in cycles of 24 harvests a year. You can think palm oil. And with these, we have different sets of questions that better reflect the harvests, but that also means that sometimes there are different numbers of questions. Sometimes we ask questions per the harvest separately, sometimes we ask them together. And factors like these can really play into how long the survey will be. Rule of thumb is that you should really not collect anything that you will not use. So in the survey, there are certain questions which are not key to you arriving at an income. The bottom line there is that if you don't need them, don't include them. What happens a lot, I feel, is that data gets collected only to sit. So I would be very selective at the end when you are done contextualizing your survey, making sure that it only covers the necessary bits. And when it comes to the proxy questions, what we are really trying to get to is a more granular view of the living income gap, also to be able to contribute to further analyses that we currently do in our projects. So asking proxy questions to arrive at more income buckets is not the level of granularity that we are currently looking for. But if that is the case for you, that is a perfectly valid substitute. And that's also something to decide during your inception and kickoff. If this is the route that will give you results good enough for the type of analysis you're trying to do, go ahead. It's always about choosing the path of least resistance realistically to arrive at the best result. So that is a very valid question. All right, perfect. If you have any more questions, pop them in the chat and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end. But to keep going to maybe the most daunting part of this process, perhaps for some, which is the analysis and recommendation part. So you have collected your data, you have reached all the farmers that you wanted to, and now we get to what do I really do with it? From a very practical perspective, the toolkit offers you scripts that go into R that are relatively standardized. Keep in mind that you will also be making a lot of decisions along the way, and these decisions need to also be reflected in the scripts. It is important for us to point out that if you don't have experience with R and you don't have any statistical analysis, the scripts will very honestly be a struggle. So there is a certain level of experience and skill that needs to go into this process. However, once you have that, there is a script for you to use to provide you with much more guidance. Second thing we offer you in terms of helping you do an analysis is a slide deck. So what you can see in the what you can see, there we go. Perfect. What you can see in the toolkit is an example of a slide deck that comes out of our usual projects that we do together with Fairfood and Akvo. And what we have opted for is more of an interactive way to show your data. So to give you a couple examples of what can be included in a slide deck like this is, for example, a graph that allows you to get a closer idea of how many farmers were in each district that you were looking at, or having a much better overview of what the sample is composed of. So usually these graphs would just be static and you would need to have many graphs per page. So we have opted for something like this that is much more visually pleasing and also invites users to play around and to explore further and to see what types of information can be gained from a simple visualization like this. To make this actionable for you, we have combined this slide deck with pieces of information coming throughout, so feel free to explore, but the information will look like something like this. What we are using to make the graphs is Flourish, which is a free platform that anyone can make an account on and get to working. There is no coding knowledge necessary. You just input your data. And the slide deck gives you very practical examples to tell you exactly how to get to the graphs that we have arrived at, as well as Flourish themselves providing a lot of additional information and resources for you to browse through. So there are a lot of options, and we also offer examples of different visualizations that we do, such as this one that tells you how much of a household's income is coming from which sources, or other visualizations that are more targeted at different segmentations that we do that compare different groups within the farmer population that we have collected data on. And it's also, in my opinion, when you get your data to look nice, it also inspires people to pay a bit more attention to what you are trying to show. When it comes to picking your segments, this is the first graph that we can see that has a little bit of that has a segmentation included. And for this analysis, we've chosen gender, certification status, and age. So you can see different groups compared. How to choose segments is something that is quite difficult and also can seem a bit daunting, but it's definitely something you can easily do through really focusing on once again what your project is meant to be about and what segments will provide you with the most information. There are a couple rules of thumbs when it comes to making segments, and that is you need to think about the different segment sizes. So you don't want your segments to be too small when it comes to the individual segment size, because then you are making predictions and making essentially analyzing a group of 20 people, which doesn't have much statistical guarantee. So you want to ensure that your sample sizes are larger. I wish I could give you an exact number. There is not an exact number I can give you. I would say that exploratory analysis, I would start around the 40, 50 mark. And then it's also important for you to either design your segments in a way that they have similar sizes, or make sure that you are taking precautions if they do not have similar sizes. If there is a large imbalance, like we, for example, often see with gender, if gender is not a part of the sampling, we see a large disbalance with there being more male farmers than female farmers. It is something that you want to be further thinking about in items such as testing for statistical significance. This is a more technical part of what we will be talking about today, but when we see differences between segments, you will see them in essentially any case, such as here, for example, we're looking at youth and non-youth farmers and their productivity. So how much they're able to produce, how much cocoa, I believe, they're able to produce per hectare. And you see that there's a slight difference of 5 kilograms. And this will always be present. No two segments will ever even out on anything, only in the minor probability case scenarios. Usually you will see some level of difference. And it can be very tempting to see this difference and take it and run with it and see it as very important and design your projects based on this difference. But the truth is that sometimes we see difference based on pure chance, and it doesn't necessarily represent anything that is happening by this division. So it's really important that you do some level of statistical analysis and statistical testing that is included in the scripts. If you get on this journey, you will reach it and you will find the statistical test that will tell you whether we are observing this difference likely just based on pure chance, or whether there is very likely something else here at play, some type of pattern, some type of trend, some type of deeper difference between, for example, youth and non-youth farmers that might be causing these differences. So it's really important to also be thinking about these other items when you are carrying out segmentation. Well, from our experience, the segmentation that tends to get the best results is based on either land size or gender, but I am sure that to many of you who work with real data, that is not a surprise. But we have also recently found some very interesting segmentations that have been based on cost and yields, which is also something that we focus on usually as part of our methodology, trying to profile farmers based on essentially their cost yield efficiency and how much they can produce within a given space for a given amount of money. So there are the possibilities are endless, and you can really segment almost on anything you can think of that you have sufficient segment sizes for, and that is consistently giving you statistically relevant results. That's what I would say about that. Are there any questions at the moment about the analysis part and getting from your data to the graphs to a slide deck? All right, that's great. And then there's maybe one final thing that is really actionable within this toolkit that is also included in the scripts, and that is also reaching further level of modeling. So there's are more analyses that we like to do that go just beyond comparison of segments. We also like to use the living income price and the difference to a living income price as a metric of success. So after implementing a specific recommendation or an intervention, what is going to happen to the living income price? But I think my colleague Lotte will actually tell you more about this recommendation building and this intervention making. So if there are no more questions about the data analysis part, I will pass the mic on to Lotte.
All right, thank you very much, Sandra. So moving on towards how to turn this data into action. So after having developed a really beautiful slide deck like the one that Sandra has just shared, it's actually time for the next step. So how to turn this data into action to actually build income resilience. And within our project, we have been working closely with supply chain partners, where we have several iteration sessions, and we really question ourselves, does this data make sense? What are the outliers? And especially, what does this data actually tell us? And how do we intend to use it? And now we understand the actual cost and yield data. You can make sustainable pricing decisions, increase your bargaining power as a farmer, as a producer or export organization, and also influence sustainable procurement practices. And in some more advanced projects, like Sandra was also saying, we also use this data to actually model the impact when prices, for instance, drop or when they increase, to really be able to prepare for market fluctuations and to play around with that data a little bit. On the other hand, it helps us guide targeted income interventions and really understand the impact and need of interventions like income diversification or cost reductions, investments in agroforestry models or other regenerative agriculture models in your supply chain. And another part of the project that we have been working on, and another important step after the data processing and after the data processing has happened, we hosted also several sense-making activities. We also describe this in the toolkit, which you can also access. But we did this in the form of either workshops and also focus group discussions, where we have validated the findings with the farmer groups that were interviewed, and obviously also gave back agency of their data back to them. We also invited farmers to be part of the decision-making process around pricing, but also the interventions that would be set up based on the outcomes of the research. We held several interactive cost of production and household expense exercises to really fully understand the concept of living income. And we were also able to understand the needs and barriers to add another layer to the data in order to prioritize and also design the pathways forward. What the toolkit also is, it's a resource library. We will also be sharing a lot of this in the email following by the webinar. So here you can also find all the documentation on previous projects. We have developed a couple of case studies and the white paper. Also very happy to share that a new case study on cocoa from Sierra Leone has actually now been published today and can be found on the Farmer Income Data Toolkit website. Then lastly, obviously, we have outsourced the methodology and the toolkit where you can access all the information for you to be able to do a data analysis within your own supply chain. But obviously, we are also available to collaborate and to work together. There's a couple of ways to do this, but what we do in several projects is we can secure funding through compelling proposals and strategic fundraising, doing this together. We can support in implementing the methodology from end to end. We can build internal capacity to manage the data and pricing discussions, design, implement interventions and sourcing strategies, and we can also communicate insights internally and externally. I think that's it. So I guess we can open up the Q&A again and see if there's any other questions that came in. And obviously, we also invite you to open up your mic if you want to, and share questions if there are any. Before that time, maybe coming back to two questions that were previously been posted and that we haven't answered yet on the sampling methodology, Sandra. So two other questions were: how large should the sample size be to ensure statistically reliable results for estimating living income gaps? And how can bias be minimized when selecting farmers for interviews or income data collection?
All right, thank you for those questions. I think on the sample size, you can easily refer to the sample size calculator. And there's also nothing stopping you from calculating backwards from the calculator instead of trying to get to a sample size. You can also use the calculator to establish your confidence intervals and margins of errors. So this may be especially interesting if you are doing segmentations and you have different groups and you would like to know, well, now out of this whole sample, if I'm deriving any results for women only, how confident am I about these results? You can also use the sample calculator backwards to arrive at margins of error and confidence intervals. And minimizing bias when selecting farmers for interviews or income data collection is a great question. And there are two scenarios really. One of them is a scenario where you receive a complete farmer list. So you have the list of the entire population to choose from. And let's say you also have some proportions on gender and land size, which is beautiful, and I'm very jealous of you. And in that case, I would, by randomizing your sampling, you are achieving the lowest possible bias that there can be in this situation. So a very practical example, you can, for example, choose to select every fourth farmer until you reach the proportions that you need to be reaching. And just make sure that you shuffle the list before you start so that the list is also in a random order. That is one way to very practically and very easily implement randomization into your samples. What we do at Akvo is we have a piece of code that randomly selects a group of farmers from a list until that group of farmers fulfills a specific condition that we have put on it. So that's another way to go about it if you are feeling a bit more adventurous. Once you don't have complete sample lists, we are reaching the territory of slightly biased samples, which is also something that is the reality on the ground in many situations. And in these cases, what you can do best is really be referring to those secondary sources for your proportions, making sure that you are not using any proportions that are not verified or that don't seem to be realistic, relying on your local expertise, listening to the people on the ground who actually work with the farmers, and really being as transparent as you can be about your sampling methods, all the decisions that you have made along the way, so that others can for themselves evaluate how much bias they foresee in your study. And also then it's good to make sure that if, for example, you know that you didn't have a complete farmer list, and for example, you are aware that the farmer list is missing women, then being responsible further down in your analysis and, for example, not segmenting based on gender if you know that this was a variable that was specifically biased in your farmer list. So that's one way to make sure that even if your sample does carry some inherent unavoidable level of bias, you are trying to limit as much as you can how that bias then seeps further into your analysis. So that would be my recommendation there.
Thank you, Sandra. So 2 more questions came in, and I think I will be the one answering those. So first question from Olga: would you also publish your Uganda coffee case studies? Yes, we will. We're currently working on them, and we are expecting to launch them by the end of November. We will also share these resources with everyone participating in this session today. Second question coming in from Ilyas Kabore. If we have a local stakeholder who is interested in the LibCan Fairfood help with resource mobilization, yes, feel free to reach out. What we do, what we are also participating in is some proposal and fundraising, proposal writing. So that is definitely something that we can support in this process, or also mobilize our network that we have. So feel free to reach out to us. Just checking, we have about 10 minutes left. In case there are any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat box. In the meantime, I would like to encourage you to keep an eye on the resource library. As mentioned, you can find 2 case studies there that are already available, one on Sierra Leone and one, for cocoa, Sierra Leone, and one on coffee in Honduras. But also FAQ about the living income commodity strategy, and also the white paper, really the backbone of the strategy itself. There's also a recording of the launch of the toolkit and another session we did on the the strategy. So please feel free to check that out. My colleague Mariana has also shared the link of the resource library in the chat. And I see a hands up. So Jurit, if you like, please open.
Yes, if there are no further questions, or maybe there's a question afterwards, I would just like to express a word of gratitude both to Fairfood and to Akvo on behalf of the donor, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I'm the program manager of Reclaim Sustainability at our end. So yeah, I think it's very, very interesting what you developed with our funding. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Jurit. Very appreciated. Yeah, we're also both very happy to having been able to develop it, and we are always open also to receive feedback. So also, if you have any feedback, please also make sure to reach out to us after this session. I saw another question coming in from Camila from Solidaridad. If we have any recommendations on sessions to give back data to farmers. Definitely, we have tested a couple of formats in the projects we have been working on. So, for instance, in Honduras, we hosted a workshop with some farmers, and we also have guided some focus group discussions in another project for Shea in Ghana. So this is also something we can help develop together, and that we have tested out in a couple of formats. And I think those both of these sessions have really also guided us really to understand whether the data also makes sense to the farmers that were participating in the studies, but also really to add that layer next to the data to really understand what is keeping them from making certain investments, or what are their other main barriers, or what do farmers prioritize in terms of where to put the investments. In terms of general recommendation, I think it's quite a broad question to be answered, but also again, feel free to reach out to me, and we can plan a session specifically on this, and I can show a bit more details on what we have tested out so far. If there are no further questions, I think we can close up the session by thanking you very much for participating in this session. And again, we cannot stress enough, feel free to reach out to us. It's an open source toolkit, but we are happy to support if you have any specific questions on how to run this by yourselves in your supply chain. And obviously we can also explore other ways of collaborating together. Yeah, keep an eye out. There will be an email with all resources and links coming up pretty soon, hopefully somewhere early next week, or maybe even later today, before making any promises here, but it will come soon. So thanks a lot, everyone. Happy to have hosted this session, and let's be in touch.